The alarm cut through the December darkness at 5:15. Mark Reynolds opened his eyes to the empty half of a king-size bed, the same way he had for the past 5 years. Sarah's photograph sat on the nightstand, frozen in a moment from their last vacation together. Big Sur, before the diagnosis, before the chemo stole her hair and the cancer stole everything else. He reached out, touched the frame with 2 fingers, then pulled his hand back. The ritual never changed. Neither did the hollow ache in his chest. The house was silent, except for the furnace kicking on somewhere below. Mark swung his legs out from under the covers and planted his feet on cold hardwood. 38 years old, co-founder of a regional aviation company worth north of $200 million. And he still couldn't bring himself to turn on the heated floors Sarah had insisted they install. She'd called it a luxury. He'd called it practical. Now it just felt like another reminder of conversations they'd never have again. Shower, shave. The Navy suit Sarah had picked out 3 Christmases ago, back when she could still stand long enough to shop. Mark knotted his tie in the bathroom mirror and studied the man staring back. Gray had started threading through the dark hair at his temples. The lines around his eyes had deepened. His daughter said he looked distinguished. His business partner said he looked exhausted. Both were probably right. Downstairs, the kitchen smelled like coffee and the faint vanilla of the candle Lily left burning on the counter. Mark flipped on the lights and pulled eggs from the refrigerator. Pancakes shaped like Mickey Mouse ears. Sarah's tradition, the one thing he'd managed to keep alive after she died. The batter sizzled when it hit the griddle. He checked his phone while the first batch cooked. Flight schedule confirmed. 8 o'clock departure from Teterboro to San Jose. 5 hours, 20 minutes, wheels up to wheels down. VIP passenger, tech executive, the kind who expected perfection and had the money to demand it. A text from Director Harper sat at the top of his messages. Heads up, flying with Captain Brennan today. She's particular. Mark typed back with one thumb. Noted. Footsteps on the stairs announced Lily before she appeared in the doorway, still in her pajamas, dark hair tangled from sleep. She was 12 now, almost 13, with Sarah's eyes and Sarah's way of seeing straight through him when he tried to hide how he was feeling. The first pancake slid onto her plate. Lily drowned it in syrup and cut a triangle with her fork. Mark poured himself coffee and leaned against the counter, watching her eat. These quiet mornings were his favorite part of any day that required him to leave before dawn. She looked up, syrup on her chin. Her voice still carried sleep in its edges. You flying today? He nodded. San Jose. Should be back late tonight. Big day for me, too. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, then corrected herself and reached for a napkin when she caught his look. Science presentation. The aerodynamics one. Mark had helped her build the model airplane 2 weeks ago, cutting balsa wood at the kitchen table while she calculated lift coefficients on her laptop. She'd explained Bernoulli's principle to him like he'd never heard of it before, even though he'd been flying for 19 years. He'd let her teach him anyway. Sarah used to say that teaching was how you really learned something. He set his coffee down. Nervous? A small shrug. A little. You prepared? Yeah. Then trust yourself. Confidence comes from preparation. You did the work. Lily chewed thoughtfully, then set her fork down. Her eyes found his across the kitchen, and the question came without warning. Dad, do you ever get scared at work? The honest answer sat in his throat for a moment before he let it out. Every time I fly. Her eyebrows lifted. Really? Fear keeps you sharp, makes you check everything twice. Your mom used to say that being scared means you're paying attention to what matters. Something shifted in Lily's expression. The mention of Sarah always did that. Brought her into the room like a presence they could both feel but neither could touch. She also said you overthink everything. Mark smiled despite himself. I do. I know. Lily grinned, and the weight in the kitchen lifted just enough. She finished her pancakes while Mark cleaned the griddle and loaded the dishwasher. The morning routine had a rhythm to it, choreographed by repetition. He'd learned that grief lived in the small moments, in the empty chair where Sarah used to sit, in the recipes he made from memory, because she wasn't there to remind him how much vanilla went in the batter. 7 minutes later, Mark grabbed his flight bag from the hall closet. Lily met him at the door with her backpack slung over one shoulder. ready for her aunt to pick her up for school. He pulled her into a hug. She smelled like syrup and the strawberry shampoo she insisted on using, even though it made her hair impossible to brush. His voice came out rougher than he intended. "Love you, kiddo." "Love you too, Dad." She squeezed him once, hard, then pulled back. "Fly safe." "Always." Mark stepped out into the December cold. The sky above Teterboro was still dark, stars fading into the gray that came before sunrise. He looked back at the house, warm lights glowing in the windows, his daughter framed in the doorway waving, and felt the familiar pull between what he was leaving and what waited for him on the other side of the day. This was the choice he made every time he left. Trust that the world would keep spinning, that Lily would be safe, that he'd come home. The drive to the airport took 11 minutes. Mark knew every turn by heart. The briefing room at Teterboro smelled like burned coffee and jet fuel. Mark pushed through the door at 6:35 and found Captain Victoria Brennan already seated at the head of the table, tablet open in front of her, fingers scrolling through weather charts. She didn't look up when he entered, didn't acknowledge him at all. Mark set his flight bag on the chair across from her and waited. The silence stretched out, deliberate and cold. He'd flown with difficult captains before, pilots who treated first officers like glorified autopilots, who barked orders and expected silence. But something about Victoria's stillness felt different, calculated. Finally, she lifted her eyes. Sharp features, no makeup, hair pulled into a bun so tight it looked painful. 4 gold stripes on each shoulder of her uniform, polished to perfection. She studied him the way someone might study a piece of equipment they didn't trust. Her voice was clipped, professional, devoid of warmth. "You must be the first officer." Mark extended his hand. "Marcus Reynolds. Most people call me Mark." She didn't take it. Instead, she glanced at her tablet, then back at him. "I'm Captain Brennan. I prefer formality in the cockpit." Mark lowered his hand and took his seat. The message was clear. This wasn't going to be a friendly flight. Victoria pulled up the flight plan and rotated the tablet so he could see. Her finger traced the route, direct to San Jose, 5 hours 20, VIP passenger confirmed. Weather looked clean, just some light chop forecast over the Rockies. Nothing unusual, nothing that should require more than standard procedures. She folded her hands on the table. "I've reviewed your file. 2,800 hours total time, 400 on type." Mark kept his face neutral. "I have additional military hours that aren't logged commercially. 10 years flying combat missions overseas." "Military flying is different." Victoria's tone made it clear what she thought of that difference. "This is civilian aviation, higher standards." The insult hung in the air between them. Mark let it sit there, didn't take the bait. He'd learned a long time ago that some people needed to establish dominance before they could relax. Victoria struck him as that type. Someone who'd fought hard for every stripe on her shoulder and expected everyone else to fight just as hard to earn her respect. He kept his voice level. "Understood, Captain." Victoria leaned back in her chair. The fluorescent lights overhead cast shadows under her eyes. "I've been flying for 16 years, Captain for 7. I don't tolerate mistakes in my cockpit. I don't tolerate sloppy procedures." She paused and something flickered across her face. Something Mark couldn't quite name. "And I especially don't tolerate men who think they know better than I do just because they've been flying for a few years. Are we clear?" The words landed like a challenge. Mark met her gaze and held it. "Crystal clear, Captain." "Good." She stood, grabbed her tablet. "One more thing. If I give you an instruction, I expect immediate compliance. Not discussion, not questions, compliance. Can you handle that?" Mark rose to his feet. "Captain, I'll follow all procedures and all lawful instructions." "That's what first officers do." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "Lawful instructions?" "Standard terminology. From the Fayars." Something cold settled into her expression. For a moment, Mark thought she might press the issue, turn it into something bigger than it needed to be. But she just picked up her flight bag and headed for the door. Her voice carried back over her shoulder. "Let's get to the aircraft. Try to keep up." Mark followed her out into the pre-dawn darkness. The tarmac stretched out in front of them, dotted with private jets in various states of preparation. Their Gulfstreams sat on the ramp, white fuselage gleaming under the floodlights. Ground crew moved around it like worker bees, fueling, checking, prepping. Mark had flown this exact aircraft dozens of times, knew its quirks, its systems, the way it handled in turbulence. But today felt different. Today, the walk from the briefing room to the plane felt like walking into a trap he couldn't see but could definitely feel closing around him. Victoria went straight for the cockpit entry stairs. Mark stopped at the nose of the aircraft and set his bag down. The cold bit through his uniform jacket. His breath came out in white clouds. She appeared at the top of the stairs, looking down at him. Problem? Mark pulled his flashlight from his bag. Walk around first. I'll start the overhead panel checks. Don't take too long. We're on a tight schedule. She disappeared inside. Mark clicked on his flashlight and began his inspection. Left wing first, leading edge clean, no ice, no damage. Fuel cap secured, safety wire intact. He ran his hand along the underside, checking for anything that felt wrong. The metal was cold enough to sting his palm. Everything looked good. He moved to the left engine. Intake clear, no foreign objects, cowling panels flush. The big Rolls-Royce turbofan sat silent, waiting. In a few hours, it would be screaming at 41,000 feet, gulping air and spitting thrust. The left main landing gear was next. Mark crouched down, flashlight beam cutting through the shadows under the wing. The tire looked good, tread depth legal, pressure solid, no visible cuts or bulges. He moved the light up the strut, checking hydraulic lines, looking for, there, a thin trail of reddish fluid barely visible, running down the side of the strut. Mark froze. He moved the flashlight closer. The fluid was fresh, glistening in the LED beam. Not a lot, maybe 2 ounces, if that. But it was there, and it was wrong. He followed the trail upward to the connection point where the hydraulic line met the strut. A small bead of fluid sat right at the fitting, catching the light like a drop of blood. Below it, older stains darkened the metal. This had been leaking for a while, but the fresh fluid meant it was still active. Mark's mind ran through the checklist automatically. Hydraulic systems on a Gulfstream controlled the landing gear, the brakes, the flight controls. Lose hydraulic pressure, and you lost redundancy. Lose enough redundancy, and you were looking at an emergency landing with a VIP passenger in winter, over mountains. This wasn't a judgment call. This was by the book. Log it. Get maintenance to inspect. Get a sign-off. Don't fly until the system is verified safe. He pulled out his phone and took 3 photos from different angles. Wide shot of the strut, close-up of the fitting, fluid on the ground below. Then he opened the maintenance app and typed left main landing gear strut, hydraulic fluid weep at upper fitting, active leak, requires inspection per 14 CFR 91.7 before flight. The app pinged his submission to the maintenance department and the director of operations. Timestamp, 6:52 a.m. Mark pocketed his phone and finished the walk-around. Everything else checked clean. Right side mirror image of the left, except no leaks. The aircraft was perfect except for that one fitting. One fitting that could kill everyone aboard if it failed at the wrong moment. Mark climbed the stairs and stepped into the cockpit. Victoria was already in the left seat, running through the overhead panel checks, switches clicking under her fingers. She glanced at him when he slid into the right seat, but didn't stop what she was doing. He waited until she finished the panel before speaking. Captain, we have a maintenance issue. Hydraulic leak on the left main gear. I've logged it and notified maintenance. Victoria's hands stilled on the switches. She turned in her seat slowly and fixed him with a look that could have stripped paint. Excuse me? Mark kept his voice even, factual. Hydraulic fluid weeping from the strut fitting. It's active. We need maintenance to inspect before we show me. She was already unbuckling, moving toward the cockpit door. They climbed down the stairs together and walked to the left main gear. Mark pointed out the trail of fluid, the bead at the fitting, the stain on the tarmac below. Victoria crouched down, studied it for maybe 10 seconds, then stood up. She didn't look concerned. She looked annoyed. Her tone was flat, dismissive. That's nothing. Hydraulic systems weep all the time. Completely normal. Mark felt something tighten in his chest. Captain, with respect, regulations require we log any fluid leak, and I don't need you to tell me the regulations. Victoria cut him off, her voice sharp enough to draw blood. I wrote half the training manuals for this company. I know what's normal and what isn't. This, she gestured at the strut, is normal. 14 CFR 91.7 states. I know what 91.7 says. She stepped closer to him. Invasion of space calculated to intimidate. This is not a safety issue. This is a nuisance finding. And you just created a problem where none existed. Mark held his ground. Captain, I've already logged it. Maintenance has been notified. Victoria's face changed. The annoyance crystallized into something colder, harder. You went over my head? Without consulting me? I followed company procedure and federal regulations. You undermined my authority. Her voice dropped to a deadly quiet. I'm the pilot in command. I make the decision about what's airworthy and what isn't. You just disregarded my assessment and went straight to maintenance. Mark could feel the confrontation spiraling, could see exactly where this was heading, and knew he had only one move left. We have a billionaire passenger waiting. We're on a tight schedule. If we delay this flight over something this minor, it reflects badly on both of us. Victoria's eyes narrowed. Are you seriously trying to lecture me about passenger relations? No, Captain Van. I'm trying to explain why I followed procedures. Your procedures just cost us an hour and made me look incompetent in front of the ground crew. The words hit him like a slap. This wasn't about safety anymore. This was about ego, about control, about Victoria needing to be right more than she needed to be safe. Mark kept his voice level, professional, even though everything in him wanted to shout. It reflects worse if we have an emergency landing because we ignored a leak. Victoria stared at him for 3 long seconds. Then she turned on her heel and walked back toward the aircraft stairs. Her voice carried back across the tarmac, cold and final. Get in the cockpit. We're going to sit here and wait for maintenance to confirm what I already know, that you wasted everyone's time. Mark watched her climb the stairs and disappear inside. His hands were shaking, not from fear, from adrenaline, from the sick realization that he'd just made an enemy of the person who controlled his immediate future. He pulled out his phone and sent a text to Director Harper. Issue with Captain Brennan. Logged hydraulic leak per regs. She disagreed with call. Situation tense. Harper's response came back in 30 seconds. Stay professional. Maintain documentation. We'll monitor. Mark pocketed his phone and followed Victoria back into the cockpit. The temperature inside had nothing to do with the December cold and everything to do with the woman sitting in the left seat, staring straight ahead, jaw clenched tight enough to crack teeth. The silence that followed was absolute. Time. Victoria picked up her phone at 7:10. Mark heard her dial, heard the muted ring on the other end, heard someone pick up. Her voice shifted into something professional, controlled, but laced with barely contained anger. This is Captain Brennan. I need to speak with Director Harper immediately. A brief hold. Mark sat in the right seat, hands resting on his knees, expression neutral. He knew what was coming, had known from the moment he logged that leak that it would come to this. Victoria's voice cut through the cockpit like a blade. Director, we have a situation. My first officer logged a non-issue on the aircraft, and now we're delayed. Pause. Mark could hear the faint murmur of Harper's voice through the phone but couldn't make out words. It's a minor hydraulic weep, completely normal. I've seen this 100 times in my 16 years of flying, but he went ahead and logged it without consulting me first. Another pause. Longer this time. Victoria's face was getting redder. I'm requesting a replacement first officer. The words came out clipped, final. I will not fly with someone who doesn't have the experience to differentiate between a real problem and a nuisance finding. Mark kept his breathing steady. This was the play. Victoria was trying to remove him from the flight, rewrite the narrative, turn his legitimate safety concern into a mark of incompetence. Harper must have pushed back because Victoria's voice rose half an octave. No, I'm not overreacting. This is about competence. This is about someone who thinks 400 hours on type makes him qualified to question my judgment. She paused, listening, and then the mask cracked. What came next was worse than anger. It was calculation. Director, I'm going to be frank with you. This is about a man who can't handle taking direction from a female captain. Victoria's tone shifted, took on the weight of accusation, of something bigger than a disagreement about hydraulics. He's trying to assert dominance. He's trying to undermine me because he can't accept that I'm in the left seat. Mark felt ice water dump down his spine. There it was, the accusation that could end a career, the card that couldn't be defended against because denial looked like confirmation. Victoria kept talking, building her case, brick by careful brick. This is exactly the kind of behavior women in this industry have been fighting against for decades. I have spent 16 years proving myself, and I will not let some first officer with an ego problem undo that. Harper said something Mark couldn't hear. Victoria's hand tightened on the phone. If you don't replace him, I'm walking off this flight. Her voice dropped to something quiet and dangerous. I will not risk my license flying with someone who's going to second-guess every decision I make. I won't do it. Another pause. Longer. Victoria's expression shifted from confident to confused to angry in the span of 3 seconds. What do you mean I should discuss it with him directly? The words came out sharp, disbelieving. I'm the captain. I'm telling you I will not fly with this man. I'm not asking for permission. I'm informing you. Whatever Harper said next made Victoria's face go pale. She stared at the instrument panel in front of her. Phone pressed to her ear, and for the first time since Mark had met her, she looked uncertain. I see. The words were barely audible. I see. The line went dead. Victoria pulled the phone away from her ear and stared at the screen like it had betrayed her. Then she turned to Mark, and the uncertainty had evaporated, replaced by something that looked a lot like fury mixed with fear. Her voice came out tight, controlled, each word carefully measured. You need to call Director Harper and explain yourself. Mark reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. He didn't dial, didn't navigate to contacts, just unlocked the screen and turned it toward Victoria so she could see. The favorites list sat at the top. 3 names, Lily, daughter, Director Harper, work, CEO Richard Sterling, co-founder. Victoria's eyes moved from the screen to Mark's face. Her mouth opened slightly, no words came out. Mark kept his voice calm, quiet, empty of gloating or anger or anything except simple fact. Marcus Reynolds, co-founder of this company. I own 49% of the fleet you're sitting in right now. The color drained from Victoria's face. I've been flying since I was 19, 10 years military, combat missions overseas before I ever touched a civilian aircraft. Came back, built this business from the ground up with Richard Sterling. He paused, let that sink in, watched her process what it meant. I still fly because I love it. Not for the hours, not for the paycheck, not to prove anything to anyone, because it matters. Victoria's hands had gone white-knuckled on the armrests of her seat. Mark's voice stayed level but gained an edge, sharp enough to cut. You can call me incompetent. You can call me inexperienced. You can call me whatever you want. But you will not ignore a safety finding on one of my aircraft. You will not put a passenger at risk because you're too proud to wait 30 minutes for a mechanic. And you will not falsely accuse me of sexism when I'm doing exactly what every pilot in this company is trained to do. The silence that followed was absolute, complete. The kind of silence that pressed against eardrums and made the air feel thin. Victoria's mouth worked soundlessly for 3 seconds before she managed to speak. Her voice came out small, shaky, nothing like the authoritative tone she'd wielded 10 minutes ago. I was testing you. Mark raised an eyebrow, said nothing. Yes. Victoria grabbed onto the lie like a drowning woman grabbing driftwood. I wanted to see if you'd follow procedures even under pressure, that's all. It was a training exercise. Mark still didn't respond, just held her gaze, let her drown in her own words. You passed. Victoria forced a smile that looked more like a grimace. Good work. You did exactly what you should have done. Mark leaned back in his seat, eyes never leaving hers. Captain, I think you should take that walk you mentioned. Get some air. Clear your head. Victoria nodded too quickly, too eager to escape. She unbuckled with shaking hands, grabbed her phone, and practically fled the cockpit. Mark watched her descend the stairs, cross the tarmac at a near run, and disappear into the FBO building. He sat alone in the cockpit and let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. His phone buzzed. Text from Harper. "What the hell just happened?" Mark typed back. "Explain my position. She's taking a break." "Your position as co-founder?" "Yes." "Jesus, Mark. She didn't know?" "Apparently not." "Stay there. Maintenance is 10 minutes out. I'll call you after." Mark set the phone in the center console and looked out at the tarmac. The sun was starting to rise, painting the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold. Somewhere in New Jersey, Lily was probably getting ready for school, practicing her presentation, trusting that her father was doing the right thing. Sarah's voice echoed in his head, memories sharp enough to hurt. Always do the right thing, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. He'd done the right thing, and it had just cost him any chance at a peaceful working relationship with Captain Victoria Brennan. The question now was what it would cost him next. The white maintenance van arrived at 7:45. Two technicians climbed out, one carrying a toolbox, the other holding a flashlight, even though the sun was up now, morning light harsh and cold across the tarmac. Mark met them at the nose gear and led them to the left main strut. The older tech, Mike, according to the name patch on his coveralls, crouched down and ran his finger along the trail of fluid. He held it up to the light, rubbed it between thumb and forefinger, then looked up at Mark with an expression that said everything Mark needed to hear. "You were absolutely right to call this in." Mike stood, wiping his hand on a rag, muffling, "This fitting's loose, hand tight, not torqued to spec. Could have blown out on landing." Relief and vindication washed through Mark in equal measure. "Can it be fixed?" "Yeah, but it'll take about 90 minutes. We need to drain the system, retorque the fitting to manufacturer spec, pressure test it, then refill and bleed the lines. Do what you need to do." Mike nodded and headed back to the van for more tools. The younger tech stayed behind, examining the fitting more closely. Mark pulled out his phone and called Harper. Director Harper picked up on the first ring. His voice carried the exhaustion of someone who'd been dealing with personnel issues since before dawn. "Mark, status?" "Maintenance confirms the leak. Loose fitting. Mike says it could have failed on landing. They're fixing it now, 90-minute estimate." Harper let out a long breath. "Where's Brennan?" "She left. Haven't seen her since she walked off. She called me twice more after your conversation. Wants to fly the trip. Says she overreacted, wants another chance." Mark leaned against the fuselage, feeling the cold metal through his uniform jacket. "She tried to pressure me into ignoring a legitimate safety issue, then falsely accused me of sexism when I didn't comply. That's not someone I want in the left seat." "I know, I agree. But she's threatening a formal complaint if we pull her from the flight. Claims we're retaliating against her for standing up to a male pilot." "Standing up to me? She tried to bully me into violating federal regulations." "I know that. You know that. But she's already building a narrative." Harper's voice took on a careful tone, the voice of someone navigating legal landmines. "Here's where we are. If we ground her now, based solely on this incident, her attorney will argue gender discrimination. She's got 16 years, clean record, never bent metal. We need to handle this carefully." Mark closed his eyes. "What are you asking me to do?" "Fly the trip. Keep everything professional. Document everything. If she steps out of line again, we'll have cause. But right now, we need more than a disagreement over maintenance protocol." Every instinct Mark had screamed against it. Putting Victoria back in the left seat felt like strapping into an aircraft with a known defect and hoping it wouldn't fail mid-flight. But Harper was right about the legal exposure, about the optics, about the system that would protect Victoria's career right up until the moment she destroyed someone else's. Mark's voice came out flat. "Understood." "I'm sorry, Mark. I know this isn't—" "It's fine. I'll handle it." He ended the call and stood there for a moment, watching the maintenance techs work on the strut. The sun was fully up now, the December morning bright and bitterly cold. Somewhere inside the FBO, Victoria was probably on the phone with her own contacts, building her version of events, preparing her defense. Mark checked his phone. Text from Lily. "Presentation went great. Mrs. Chen said it was A+ work." "Love you," he typed back. "Proud of you, kiddo. Love you too." His daughter was 12 years old and already understood something that eluded people 3 times her age. Preparation plus honesty equals success. No shortcuts, no compromises. Just do the work and trust the outcome. Mark wondered what she'd think if she knew what her father was about to do. Climb into a cockpit with someone who just tried to destroy his reputation. Spend 5 hours in a confined space with someone who saw him as a threat to everything she'd built. Sarah's voice again, quieter this time. Character is what you do when no one's watching, when it's hard, when it costs you something. Mark pocketed his phone and went back to watching the mechanics work. 40 minutes later, Victoria returned. Mark saw her crossing the tarmac from the FBO, shoulders squared, chin up, every inch the professional pilot. She climbed the stairs without looking at him and took her seat in the cockpit. The silence was immediate and absolute. Mike appeared at the cockpit door at 8:30, clipboard in hand. "You're good to go. Fitting torqued to spec. System pressure tested. Hold solid. Here's the sign-off." Mark took the paperwork, reviewed it, signed it. Mike nodded and disappeared. Mark filed the paperwork in the maintenance log and powered up the aircraft systems. Victoria was already running through the overhead panel, hands moving with mechanical precision, her face blank of all expression. They ran the checklist without speaking except for required callouts. No small talk, no coordination beyond what regulations demanded. The cockpit felt smaller than it had an hour ago, the air thick with everything unsaid. At 8:45, a man in a dark suit appeared at the bottom of the stairs. James Whitmore, the VIP passenger, tech CEO worth $8 billion according to the briefing notes. He looked up at the cockpit, caught Mark's eye and nodded. Mark nodded back. James climbed aboard. His voice came through the cabin intercom a moment later. "Captain, First Officer, apologies for the delay on my end. Thank you for your patience." Victoria keyed the intercom. Her voice was perfectly professional, warm even. "No apology necessary, Mr. Whitmore. We had a minor maintenance issue that's been resolved. We're ready for departure now. Appreciate the thoroughness, safety first." Victoria's jaw tightened fractionally. Mark pretended not to notice. They called for taxi clearance. Ground control gave them runway 6. Victoria advanced the throttles and the Gulfstream rolled forward, 70,000 pounds of aircraft moving like it weighed nothing. The tower cleared them for takeoff. Victoria lined up on the center line, performed the final checks, then pushed the throttles to the stops. The Rolls-Royce engine spooled up to a scream. The aircraft accelerated down the runway, faster and faster, until the nose lifted and the wheels left the pavement. New Jersey dropped away below them. Victoria called for gear up. Mark raised the lever. 3 green lights went out. No warning lights, no hydraulic issues. The fitting held. They climbed through 15,000 feet into clear December sky. The morning sun painted everything gold. Below, the landscape scrolled past, cities and suburbs giving way to farmland, farmland giving way to forests, forests eventually giving way to plains and then mountains. Victoria didn't speak. Mark handled the radios, monitored the systems, ran the checklists. At flight level 410, 41,000 feet, Victoria engaged the autopilot and sat back. Her hands stayed on the control wheel anyway, just resting there, like she didn't trust the automation. The silence stretched for an hour, then 2, then 3. Mark thought about Lily at school, wondered if she was eating lunch now, wondered if she was telling her friends about her presentation, wondered if she mentioned that her father was somewhere over Colorado in an aircraft that was running perfectly because he'd insisted on checking a hydraulic fitting that morning. He thought about Sarah, about the conversations they'd had about integrity and compromise, and where the line was between being principled and being stubborn. She'd always said you knew where the line was because it was the point where people started calling you difficult instead of calling you right. He thought about Victoria, about whatever had happened to her in 16 years of flying that made her see threats where none existed, made her unable to distinguish between legitimate concern and personal attack. About what kind of system created pilots like her and then protected them until they finally broke something that couldn't be fixed. At 1 o'clock Mountain Time, they started their descent into San Jose. The approach was textbook. Victoria flew it by hand, smooth and precise, proving that whatever her flaws, she was a skilled pilot when she wanted to be. The landing was perfect, barely felt the wheels touch. They taxied to the FBO and shut down the engines. Victoria completed the post-flight checklist without looking at Mark. When everything was secured, she unbuckled, grabbed her bag, and stood. For a moment, she seemed like she might say something. Her mouth opened. But whatever words she'd been planning died before they reached her lips. She turned and left the cockpit, descended the stairs, crossed the tarmac without looking back. James Whitmore appeared in the cockpit doorway a minute later. "Hell of a flight. Thank you both." Mark looked up from the logbook. "Glad it was smooth, Mr. Whitmore." "Can I ask you something?" James leaned against the doorframe. "That delay this morning, the maintenance issue, was it serious?" Mark chose his words carefully. "The fitting was loose, could have caused problems. Maintenance fixed it properly." "And the captain didn't think it needed fixing?" There was a test hidden in the question, Mark realized. James Whitmore hadn't built an $8 billion company by being oblivious to interpersonal dynamics. He'd probably heard the tension in their voices over the intercom, seen it in their body language during the brief moments he'd observed them. Mark kept his voice neutral. "The captain had a different assessment. I logged it because regulations required it." James nodded slowly. "I've been flying private for 15 years. You know what the difference is between pilots I trust and pilots I don't?" Mark waited. "The ones I trust tell me when something's wrong, even when it's inconvenient, even when it makes them look paranoid. The ones I don't trust tell me everything's fine right up until the moment it isn't." James extended his hand. Mark shook it. "You made the right call today." James's grip was firm, his eyes serious. "Thank you for that." After James left, Mark finished the post-flight paperwork and secured the aircraft. The hotel was 10 minutes away. The van dropped him at the lobby at 3 o'clock Pacific time. He checked in, rode the elevator to the 4th floor, and collapsed on the bed, still wearing his uniform. His phone buzzed. Text from Lily. "Home with Aunt Sarah. Made dinner. Pasta. Don't worry, it's edible. When are you back?" Mark smiled despite the exhaustion. "Tomorrow afternoon. Save me some pasta?" "Always. Love you, Dad. Love you too, kiddo." He lay there for 5 minutes, staring at the ceiling, replaying the day. The hydraulic leak, Victoria's accusations, the reveal in the cockpit, Harper's careful navigation of legal exposure. The silent flight, James Whitmore's unexpected validation. His phone buzzed again. Email this time. Subject line from Director Harper. "Urgent HR issue." Mark opened it. His stomach dropped. "Mark, Victoria filed a formal complaint tonight. Claims hostile work environment and gender discrimination. She's hired an attorney, Sarah Chen, known for high-profile cases. HR needs your statement by tomorrow morning." "This is serious. Call me ASAP." Mark closed his eyes. Of course she had. Of course, this was just beginning. He thought about Lily asking him that morning if he ever got scared. The answer was yes, always yes. But fear wasn't a reason to stop doing what was right. It was just the price you paid for having principles. Sarah's voice one more time, clear as if she were sitting beside him on the hotel bed. "Character is what you do when no one's watching, when it's hard, when it costs you something. Tomorrow this would get harder. Victoria's attorney would build a narrative. The company would lawyer up. HR would conduct investigations. His name would get dragged through depositions and hearings and possibly court. But tonight, a hydraulic fitting on a Gulfstream G650 was torqued to proper specification. An $8 billion tech CEO had made it home to his family safely. And somewhere in New Jersey, a 12-year-old girl was eating pasta she'd cooked herself, proud of a presentation she'd given that morning, trusting that her father was doing the right thing even when it was hard. Mark opened his eyes and reached for his phone. Time to start documenting everything. Time to prepare for the fight Victoria had just declared. Time to prove that doing the right thing, even when it cost him everything, was the only choice he'd ever been able to make. 2 days later, Mark sat across from Jennifer Chen and Tom Rodriguez in a conference room that smelled like stale air conditioning and corporate anxiety. Jennifer directed HR. Tom handled legal. Both had notepads open and expressions that gave away nothing. Jennifer folded her hands on the table. "Mr. Reynolds, thank you for coming in. We need to discuss Captain Brennan's complaint." Mark pulled a folder from his briefcase and slid it across the table. "I have documentation prepared." Tom opened the folder. Inside, 3 photographs of the hydraulic leak, time-stamped at 6:52 a.m. A screenshot of the maintenance log entry. Text messages with Director Harper. The sign and maintenance work order from Tech Mike. A printed copy of 14 CFR 91.7 highlighted in yellow. Jennifer reviewed the materials, passing each page to Tom. Neither spoke for 90 seconds. Finally, Tom looked up. Captain Brennan alleges you created a hostile work environment. Specifically, she claims you undermined her authority as pilot in command, refused to accept her professional assessment, went over her head to file a maintenance report, used your ownership position to intimidate her, and demonstrated a pattern of disrespecting female authority. Mark kept his hands flat on the table. Let me address each point. I didn't undermine her authority. I followed federal regulations that apply to every crew member, regardless of rank. I didn't refuse her assessment. I documented a factual condition that required maintenance inspection per FAA rules. I didn't go over her head. Maintenance logging is a regulatory requirement for any pilot who discovers a deficiency. I didn't reveal my position until after she called Director Harper demanding my removal. And I've never in 10 years demonstrated disrespect based on gender. Check my record. Tom made notes. Jennifer leaned back in her chair. There's one more element. The cockpit voice recorder captured the entire pre-flight conversation, including Captain Brennan's phone call to Director Harper. Mark's pulse kicked up a notch. And her accusations of sexism are unsupported by the audio. Jennifer's tone stayed carefully neutral. In fact, the recording contradicts several of her claims. What happens now? Tom set down his pen. We continue the investigation. Captain Brennan is on administrative leave pending our review. Her attorney sent a demand letter yesterday. $2 million in damages, reinstatement, and a formal written apology from you personally. The number hung in the air like smoke. Mark felt his jaw tighten. No. Jennifer tilted her head. No to which part? All of it. I did nothing wrong. If she wants to take this to court, that's her choice. But I won't apologize for following regulations, and I won't pay her to go away. Tom and Jennifer exchanged a glance. Tom closed the folder. We'll need a few more days to complete our investigation. In the meantime, maintain all documentation. Don't discuss this case with other employees, and don't contact Captain Brennan directly. Mark stood. Understood. Walking back to his office, he felt the weight of what was coming. Victoria wasn't going to back down. Her attorney wasn't filing demand letters for show. This would escalate: interviews, depositions, possibly litigation. The company would spend hundreds of thousands defending itself. His name would appear in court documents, maybe in the press, and through it all, he'd have to keep running the business, keep flying, keep being present for Lily. His phone buzzed. Text from Richard Sterling. Need to talk. My office, 20 minutes. Richard Sterling had been Mark's flight instructor 15 years ago, back when Mark was fresh out of the military and Richard was building a regional charter service with 2 leased aircraft and more ambition than capital. They'd grown the company together, Richard bringing business acumen and Mark bringing operational expertise. When they incorporated, Richard took 51% in the CEO title. Mark took 49% and stayed in the cockpit. The arrangement worked because they trusted each other completely. Richard's office occupied the corner of the building with windows overlooking the flight line. He was standing at the glass when Mark entered, hands in his pockets, gray hair catching the afternoon light. At 55, Richard looked like what he was, a former Marine pilot who traded the cockpit for the boardroom, but never quite shed the military bearing. He turned when Mark closed the door. Harper briefed me. This is a shitstorm. Mark dropped into one of the leather chairs facing Richard's desk. Victoria's attorney is good. Sarah Chen, she's better than good. Won 3 major discrimination cases in the last 2 years. 2 settled for 7 figures. 1 went to trial and the plaintiff won $4 million. So we're in trouble. Richard moved to his desk and sat on the edge, arms crossed. We're in trouble if Victoria can prove her case. But Mark, I've known you for 15 years. I've seen you fly with dozens of female pilots. You've never shown bias, not once. Tell that to her attorney. I will. In a deposition, under oath. Richard's voice hardened. But here's what worries me. Samtix, female captain, gets terminated after calling out male owner. Media will eat it alive. Doesn't matter what actually happened. The narrative writes itself. Mark scrubbed his hands over his face. So what do you want me to do? I want you to be prepared. This won't stay internal. Chen will leak it. Aviation forms first, then the press. We need to control our message. Which is what? That we fired a captain for trying to fly with a known defect? That we terminated a captain for violating safety regulations and making false accusations? But we need proof, documentation, witnesses. Richard paused. Harper pulled Victoria's employment file. Found something interesting. Mark looked up. What? 6 prior incidents in 3 years. 4 complaints from male first officers, 2 from female first officers, all describing similar behavior: dismissive, hostile, refused input, created unsafe cockpit environment. The information settled in Mark's chest like a stone. And nobody did anything. She got verbal warnings, conflict resolution training, kept flying. Richard's expression darkened. We should have acted sooner. We knew she had issues. We looked the other way because firing a female captain in this industry is complicated. Now we're here. Mark stood and walked to the windows. On the tarmac below, a Gulfstream was being towed to the maintenance hangar. Ground crew moved around it like ants, purposeful and small. So we let her abuse people for 3 years because we were afraid of bad PR. And now we have bad PR anyway, plus a lawsuit. Yeah. Richard's voice carried the weight of shared culpability. We failed, but we can't change the past. We can only handle what's in front of us. Mark turned. Victoria's attorney is going to paint me as a rich guy who punished a woman for standing up to him. Probably. And the fact that I own the company gives her ammunition. Yes. So how do we win? Richard stood. We tell the truth. We present the evidence. We show the pattern of behavior. And we trust that facts matter more than narrative. He moved closer, put a hand on Mark's shoulder. But Mark, you need to know, this is going to get ugly. Chen will dig into your life. She'll interview everyone you've ever flown with. She'll look for any crack in your story. You ready for that? Mark thought about Lily, about Sarah's memory, about everything he'd built over 15 years. I don't have a choice. No. Richard's grip tightened briefly, then released. You don't. The story leaked 4 days later. Someone, Mark never found out who, sent details to an aviation forum popular with professional pilots. Within hours, the thread had 200 replies. Half defended Victoria as another woman being silenced by male power structures. Half called her out for ignoring safety protocols. The debate spilled onto social media, gathered momentum, turned toxic. By day 2, feminist pilot organizations were rallying around Victoria. The hashtag #StandWithVictoria trended on aviation Twitter. Op-eds appeared arguing that women in male-dominated fields face systematic retaliation when they challenged authority. The fact that Mark owned the company became Exhibit A, proof that power imbalances made genuine accountability impossible. Mark watched it unfold from behind his desk, scrolling through threads where strangers debated his character and motivations. Some of the attacks were personal. One user called him a mediocre pilot trading on daddy's money. Another suggested he'd bought his way into ownership rather than earning it. A third speculated that his military service was probably desk job bullshit dressed up as combat flying. He closed the browser and tried to focus on quarterly financials. Failed, opened his phone, found a text from Lily. Kids at school are talking about you. Someone's mom saw stuff online. You okay? His fingers hovered over the keyboard. How did he explain this to a 12-year-old? That doing the right thing sometimes meant watching strangers tear apart your reputation? That telling the truth didn't guarantee people would believe you? He typed, I'm okay, kiddo. People sometimes disagree about what happened. The important thing is, I know I did what was right. Her response came fast. I know you did too. Love you. Mark set the phone down and stared at the financial spreadsheets without seeing them. Somewhere in the building, Richard was probably dealing with reporters calling for comment. Harper was likely managing internal communications, making sure employees knew the company line, and Victoria was probably sitting with her attorney planning the next move. The phone rang, Harper's extension. Mark picked up. Yeah? Just got a call from Aviation Weekly. They're running a profile on Victoria. Long-form piece. Goes live tomorrow. Harper's voice carried the exhaustion of someone fighting a losing battle. They found her history. What history? 12 years ago, regional airline, she reported sexual harassment by a senior captain. Management dismissed it, told her to toughen up or find another career. Mark closed his eyes. Jesus. The captain's name was Doug Patterson. He's still flying. United, I think. Never faced consequences. Harper paused. The article is sympathetic to Victoria, frames her behavior as trauma response, says the industry failed her first. Did it? Yeah, probably. Harper's tone shifted, became more careful. But Mark, that doesn't excuse what she did to you. Doesn't excuse putting passengers at risk. You can acknowledge someone's pain without accepting their actions. I know, said Doug. Do you? Because when this article drops, public opinion is going to shift. People love a redemption narrative. Victim becomes crusader. You're going to be cast as the latest chapter in her trauma story. Mark leaned back in his chair. Through the window, the December sky was turning gray. Storm coming. Let them cast me however they want. The facts don't change. The hydraulic fitting was loose. Victoria tried to fly anyway. I logged it. That's the story. Facts don't always win, Mark. Then we're all fucked anyway. Harper hung up. Mark sat alone in his office and watched the storm clouds roll in. The article published at 6 a.m. By noon, it had been shared 5,000 times. By evening, it was trending on 3 platforms. The headline read, Captain Victoria Brennan, Survivor or Scapegoat? Mark forced himself to read it. The writing was good, tight, evocative, pulling emotional threads while maintaining journalistic distance. It detailed Victoria's harassment in 2011, quoted her formal complaint, included management's dismissive response. Patterson appeared briefly, declining comment through his union representative. The piece then jumped to the present, drawing a line from past trauma to current conflict. The implication was clear. Victoria's defensive behavior stemmed from institutional failure. She'd been conditioned to fight because nobody had protected her when she needed it. The final paragraph landed like a hammer. Now, 13 years after the industry failed Victoria Brennan, she faces termination for challenging another captain's judgment. Whether this represents accountability or another chapter in aviation's long history of punishing women who refuse to stay quiet remains to be seen. Mark closed his laptop. The article was effective because it wasn't wrong. Victoria had been harmed. The system had failed her. Patterson should have faced consequences and didn't. All of that was true. But it was also true that trauma didn't grant immunity from accountability. Victoria had tried to fly with a hydraulic defect. She'd falsely accused him of discrimination. She'd built her defense on a foundation of lies mixed with legitimate grievance. And separating the two required nuance that social media couldn't provide. His phone lit up. Unknown number. Mark almost declined, then answered. Reynolds. Mr. Reynolds, this is James Whitmore. We met briefly on the flight to San Jose. Mark sat up straighter. Mr. Whitmore, what can I do for you? I saw the news, the articles, the social media discussion. Whitmore's voice was calm, measured. I wanted to reach out because I was there. I know what happened. I appreciate that, but I'm going public. The words were flat, final. Giving a statement to Aviation Weekly. On the record, you made the right call that day. Captain Brennan tried to pressure you into ignoring a legitimate safety concern. I'm alive because you didn't bend. That needs to be part of the story. Relief flooded through Mark's chest. Mr. Whitmore, you don't have to do this. Yeah, I do. I've been flying private for 15 years. I've seen pilots cut corners. I've seen people prioritize schedule over safety. What you did was exactly what every passenger hopes happens, but rarely does. Someone saying no when no is the right answer. Whitmore paused. I'm also donating to your legal defense fund. If you don't have one, you should. This is going to get expensive. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just keep doing what you did. Keep being the pilot who gives a damn. The line went dead. Mark set the phone down and allowed himself 30 seconds of something that felt dangerously close to hope. The cockpit voice recorder leak happened 3 weeks after Victoria's formal complaint. Mark was in a meeting with the company's insurance carrier when Harper burst in without knocking, tablet in hand, face drained of color. The CVR audio is online. Mark's stomach dropped. What? Someone leaked it. Aviation Forum first. Now it's everywhere. Full audio from the pre-flight conversation, including Victoria's phone call. The insurance rep looked between them. That's evidence in an active investigation. Who the hell leaked it? Harper shook his head. Don't know. Don't care right now. The damage is done. Mark took the tablet. The audio file sat at the top of the forum thread, embedded with a simple caption. Brennan versus Reynolds, full CVR recording. 20,000 views already. The comments section was exploding. He pressed play. Static hiss, then Victoria's voice, sharp and clear. I don't need you to tell me the regulations. I wrote half the training manuals. Mark's response, measured and calm. Captain, with respect, regulations require we log any fluid leak, and then the phone call. Victoria's accusations, stripped of context but damning in their clarity. This is about a man who can't handle taking direction from a female captain. He's trying to assert dominance. Mark heard his own voice in the recording. Professional, never raised, citing regulations, staying factual. Then Victoria's backpedaling after the reveal, the obvious lie about testing him. The recording ended with silence, the kind that carried more weight than words. The comments were brutal. Former Victoria supporters abandoning ship, pilots dissecting her behavior, pointing out specific violations. Someone linked to the original Aviation Weekly article with a new comment. This changes everything. She lied. Harper took the tablet back. Legal says the leak probably came from inside the FAA. They're investigating. But honestly, this helps us. By destroying what's left of her credibility. Yeah, Harper didn't sound happy about it. Victoria's attorney is already claiming illegal disclosure, evidence tampering, but the audio is out there now. Can't be unheard. Mark stood and walked to the window. Outside, aircraft were being prepped for evening flights. Life continuing like normal while his world spun in circles. This doesn't make me feel good, Harper. It shouldn't, but it's the truth. That's what we've been saying all along. Just tell the truth. Harper's voice softened. Mark, I know this is ugly. I know you're not the kind of guy who takes satisfaction in someone else's downfall. But Victoria did this. Not you. She made the accusations. She tried to fly with a defective aircraft. She built a case on lies. The recording proves it. And now her career is over. Her career was over the moment she decided lying was easier than admitting a mistake. Mark didn't respond. Harper left. The insurance rep followed. Mark stood alone watching the sunset over the flight line, feeling hollow despite winning. The FAA investigation followed 3 weeks later. Federal Aviation Administration Regional Office, New York, third-floor conference room with fluorescent lights and government-issue furniture. 3 inspectors sat on one side of a long table. Mark and the company attorney occupied the other. Victoria and her lawyer, Sarah Chen, sat at the far end. Director Harper waited in the hall as a witness. Lead Inspector Daniel Harris opened a thick folder and pulled out the maintenance logs, the CVR transcript, Tech Mike's written statement, and photographs of the hydraulic fitting. He laid them across the table like cards in a high-stakes game. His voice carried the flat authority of someone who'd seen everything twice. We've reviewed all evidence. Our findings? The hydraulic leak was real, active, and required maintenance action before flight. Technician Mike Torrens confirmed the fitting was hand-tight, not torqued to manufacturer specification. Had it failed during landing, loss of hydraulic pressure would have compromised braking, steering, and potentially flight control systems. First Officer Reynolds followed proper procedure by logging the deficiency. Captain Brennan attempted to pressure said first officer to ignore the deficiency and proceed with flight. Sarah Chen leaned forward. Inspector Harris, my client has 16 years of experience and a spotless safety record. She made a professional judgment based on that experience. A judgment contradicted by the mechanic who examined the aircraft. Harris didn't look up from his notes. Captain Brennan, You violated 14 CFR 91.7, operating an airworthy aircraft. You violated 14 CFR 91.13, careless and reckless operation. And you violated 14 CFR 21.13, crew coordination requirements. Victoria's face had gone pale. She opened her mouth, but Chen put a hand on her arm, silencing her. Harris continued, "We also reviewed your employment history. 6 crew complaints in 3 years. 4 from male first officers, 2 from female first officers. Pattern of dismissive behavior, refusal to accept input, and creation of hostile cockpit environment." Chen straightened. "Those were personnel disputes, Inspector, not safety violations. Attempting to fly with a known hydraulic leak is a safety violation. Calling your director to remove a crew member for following regulations is a safety violation. This isn't about personality conflicts, counselor. This is about a captain who endangered passengers to protect her ego." The words hung in the air like an executioner's blade. Harris closed the folder and looked directly at Victoria. "Based on the evidence, the Federal Aviation Administration is suspending your airline transport pilot certificate, effective immediately. This case is being referred to the FAA Compliance and Enforcement Division for determination of civil penalties. The suspension remains in effect pending their review." Victoria's attorney stood. "We will appeal. This is a disproportionate response to a minor disagreement about maintenance protocols." Harris finally looked up. "Counselor, your client tried to fly a $70 million aircraft carrying a passenger over the Rocky Mountains with a hydraulic system that could have failed on approach. There's nothing minor about that. We're done here." Mark watched Victoria's face crumble, watched the reality settle in, grounded, under investigation, career in ruins. He should have felt vindication, felt relief. Instead, he just felt tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of watching someone destroy themselves rather than admit a mistake. Tired of the whole ugly mess. Outside the building, Harper caught up with him on the steps. "FAA doesn't usually move that fast. Harris must have seen something that really concerned him." Mark stopped walking. "She's done, isn't she? Even if she appeals, even if she gets the suspension lifted, no airline is going to hire a captain with an FAA safety violation on her record." "Probably not. So we won." Harper studied him. "You did the right thing, Mark. Don't let guilt complicate that." "I'm not guilty, I'm just—" Mark trailed off, searching for the word. "I understand why she is the way she is. The harassment, the system failing her. I understand it. But understanding doesn't change what she did, doesn't change that she put people at risk, doesn't change that she lied about me." "No, it doesn't." Harper clapped him on the shoulder. "Come on, let's get out of here." They drove back to Teterboro in silence. Mark watched New Jersey scroll past the window and thought about Lily, about what he'd tell her when she asked how today went. He'd tell her the truth, that he'd done what was right, that the authorities agreed that sometimes doing the right thing meant watching someone else pay the consequences. But he'd also tell her what he wished someone had told Victoria 13 years ago, that being hurt doesn't give you permission to hurt others. That trauma explains but doesn't excuse. That the only way to break cycles of harm is to choose differently, even when it's hard, even when you've earned the right to be angry, especially then. Victoria's lawsuit collapsed 3 months after the FAA ruling. Federal court, discrimination case, Judge Margaret Torres presiding. Mark sat in the gallery while his attorney presented the evidence. Maintenance logs, CVR transcript, FAA findings, 6 prior crew complaints. Victoria's attorney tried to argue trauma response, institutional bias, retaliation for speaking truth to power. The judge listened to 2 hours of testimony before delivering her ruling from the bench. Her voice carried no sympathy, just the weight of legal precedent. This court acknowledges the plaintiff's difficult history in the aviation industry. However, termination was based on documented safety violations and false accusations. Not gender. Evidence including cockpit voice recordings directly contradicts the plaintiff's claims. Pattern of complaints predating the incident with Mr. Reynolds demonstrates ongoing behavioral issues unrelated to this specific confrontation. The FAA's independent findings further support the defendant's position. Plaintiff's case is dismissed with prejudice. Victoria sat motionless as her attorney filed immediate notice of appeal. That appeal was denied 6 weeks later. Her ATP license remained permanently revoked. Through industry contacts, Mark heard she'd moved to Oregon, taken a job as a corporate safety consultant. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. He should have felt closure. Instead, he felt the hollow ache of winning a fight nobody should have had to have in the first place. That evening, Mark drove home through February slush and gray skies. The house was empty, Lily at a sleepover, his sister having picked her up after school. Mark microwaved leftover pasta and ate standing at the kitchen counter, staring at nothing. The lawsuit was over. Victoria was gone. His reputation was intact. The company had survived. By every objective measure, he'd won. So why did it feel like losing? He thought about the Aviation Weekly article, about Victoria at 27, harassed by Patterson, reporting it, being told to toughen up. He thought about the 12 years between that moment and their confrontation in the cockpit. 12 years of building walls, developing defensive mechanisms, turning protection into aggression. 12 years of the industry failing to address what had broken her. And then she'd broken 6 other pilots. 4 men, 2 women, all of them filing complaints that went nowhere. All of them told to deal with it, to work around her, to accept that this was just how Victoria was. Until finally she'd pushed too far, endangered passengers, and the whole structure collapsed. Mark sat down at the kitchen table. Sarah's photograph hung on the wall, the one from Big Sur, her smile frozen in sunlight. He stared at it, searching for answers in a face that couldn't speak. What would she say about all this? Would she be proud that he'd stood his ground? Or would she be disappointed that the only solution had been destruction? Would she see the victory, or would she see the waste? A talented pilot's career ended not because of one mistake, but because of 13 years of accumulated failure by everyone around her. His phone buzzed. Text from Richard. Board wants to brief tomorrow, 9 a.m. Also, we need to talk about culture, long term. This can't happen again. Mark typed back, agreed, see you at 9. He set the phone down and looked around the empty kitchen. The house felt too big, too quiet. Lily would be home tomorrow, filling it with noise and life, and questions he didn't know how to answer. She'd ask about the lawsuit. She'd ask if he was okay. She'd probably ask about Captain Brennan, because Lily had a habit of caring about people even when they didn't deserve it. What would he tell her? That sometimes doing the right thing meant someone else paid the price? That justice and fairness weren't always the same thing? That you could win and still feel like you'd lost something important? Mark stood and walked to the window. Outside, winter was holding on. Dirty snow piled in the driveway, bare trees black against the gray sky. Spring would come eventually. Things would thaw. Life would continue. But something had changed. Mark couldn't quite name it yet, couldn't quite see its shape. Just knew that standing in his kitchen, victory settled like ash in his mouth. He needed to figure out what came next, not just for him, for the company. For every pilot who'd fly with them. For every first officer who'd face a difficult captain and need to know the company would protect them for doing the right thing. Richard was right. This couldn't happen again. But preventing it required more than better HR policies or stricter oversight. It required something fundamental. Something Mark hadn't figured out yet but knew was out there waiting for him to see it. He looked at Sarah's photo one more time. Her voice echoed in his memory, something she'd said years ago after a particularly difficult personnel situation. You can't just punish the bad ones, Mark. You have to build the good ones. Build them right from the start. Build them right from the start. The thought lodged in his brain, incomplete but insistent. Mark turned off the kitchen lights and headed upstairs. Tomorrow he'd talk to Richard. Tomorrow he'd start figuring out what building them right from the start actually meant. Tomorrow he'd find a way to turn this hollow victory play into something that mattered. Tonight, he just needed to sleep. 6 months after the press conference, Mark sat in his office reviewing applications that kept arriving despite the deadline having passed 3 weeks ago. The number stunned him, 2,847 total applicants. Single mothers working overnight shifts. Veterans with combat medals and no clear path forward. Former teachers, mechanics, airport ground crew, people who'd spent years watching planes and dreaming of flying them. The selection committee had worked 12-hour days for 3 months. Aptitude tests, psychological evaluations, panel interviews. They'd narrowed 2,847 down to 50. The quality was so strong that Richard had pushed to increase the class size. Mark had agreed. One application kept pulling him back. Emma Martinez, 26, Army Logistics Officer, 4 years active duty, single mother to Tyler, age 4. Her essay opened, "I've dreamed of flying since watching C-130s take off in Kandahar. But between student loans and childcare costs, I couldn't save $80,000 in 3 lifetimes. This scholarship isn't just an opportunity. It's proof that someone believes people like me belong in a cockpit." Mark had interviewed her personally. She'd arrived 15 minutes early, uniform pressed, resume memorized. When he'd asked about her biggest weakness, she hadn't hedged. "I overthink decisions because I'm terrified of making mistakes that affect my son, but I'm learning that being careful isn't the same as being afraid." He'd selected her on the spot. Number 3 on the final list. Now, September morning, Mark stood in the flight school hangar watching 50 students file in for orientation. Emma was among them, sitting near the front, notepad already open. The instructor, Chief Pilot Rodriguez, 20-year veteran, began with the speech Mark had helped write. "You're here because someone saw potential. But potential means nothing without discipline. Over the next 10 months, you'll learn to fly. But more importantly, you'll learn our culture. Safety is non-negotiable. Experience doesn't excuse poor judgment. Humility matters more than ego. And when you see something wrong, you speak up, regardless of who you're speaking to." Mark watched Emma taking notes, watched the other students leaning forward, hungry for this chance they'd never thought possible. He felt Sarah's presence like a hand on his shoulder. This was what she'd meant. Build them right from the start. 10 months passed in a blur of ground school, flight training, simulator sessions. Mark reviewed progress reports weekly. Emma's instructors used words like meticulous, humble, eager. Her check ride scores were consistently high, not perfect, but that wasn't the point. Perfect pilots didn't exist. Safe pilots did. One report caught his attention. Instructor notes from a cross-country flight. Student Martinez identified a discrepancy in fuel calculations during pre-flight planning. When questioned, she admitted she'd initially missed it and only caught it on third review. Stated, "I'd rather look paranoid than run out of fuel over Nebraska." Excellent safety mindset. Mark highlighted that passage and forwarded it to Richard with one word. Exactly. Emma passed her commercial check ride on the first attempt. 2 months later, she completed type rating for the Gulfstream G650. Her training file showed 287 hours total time, barely enough to be dangerous according to old-school pilots. But Mark had flown with plenty of 10,000-hour pilots who'd accumulated bad habits along with their hours. He'd take a humble 287-hour pilot over an arrogant 10,000-hour pilot any day. He made a decision. He'd fly Emma's first revenue trip as captain, with her in the right seat. Full circle, the way Richard had trained him 15 years ago. The way the cycle should continue. 1 year and 2 months after the Victoria incident, Mark met Emma Martinez in the briefing room at 6:30 on a March morning. She was already there, nervous energy evident in how she kept adjusting her tablet, checking her bag, smoothing her uniform. Mark set his flight bag down. "How you feeling?" Emma's voice came out steadier than her hands looked. "Terrified, excited, grateful." "Good, that means you're paying attention." Mark opened the weather charts. Flight to Miami, tech conference passengers. Weather's clear, should be smooth. "Any questions before we head out?" "Just one." Emma met his eyes. "If I mess up today, will you tell me?" Mark smiled. "Count on it. But Emma, you're not going to mess up. You're going to fly exactly like you've been trained. Trust that." They reviewed the flight plan together, ran through contingencies, discussed alternate airports. Emma knew her stuff cold. At 6:55, they headed to the tarmac. The Gulfstream G700 waited in the pre-dawn light, newer model than the aircraft from that December morning. Sleeker lines, updated avionics. But the pre-flight ritual remained unchanged. Mark headed for the cockpit entry. I'll start the overhead checks. You take the walk around. Emma nodded and pulled out her flashlight, even though the sun was starting to rise. Mark climbed into the left seat and watched through the windscreen as she began her inspection. Methodical, thorough, no shortcuts. Left wing, she ran her hand along the leading edge, checked the fuel cap, examined every surface. Left engine, careful inspection of the intake, the cowling, the mounting points. Left main landing gear. She crouched down with the flashlight, just like Mark had taught her, checking the strut, the tire, the hydraulic lines. Then she moved to the right side. Mirror inspection, wing, engine, gear. She crouched at the right main, stayed down longer than the left side, pulled out her phone. Mark felt his pulse increase. He climbed down from the cockpit and walked to where Emma was still crouched. "What have you got?" She pointed with the flashlight. "Hydraulic stain on the strut. Small. Looks old, but company policy says we log and verify anything that could be fluid." Mark crouched beside her. The stain was barely visible, faint darkening on the metal that could easily be dismissed as old residue. Most pilots would have missed it. Even more would have seen it and convinced themselves it was nothing. He stood. "What's the regulation?" Emma didn't hesitate. 14 CFR 91.7. Can't operate an aircraft with known defects. Any fluid leak gets logged and inspected. "And if I told you we're on a tight schedule, that the passengers are already in the terminal?" Her jaw set. The nervousness vanished, replaced by something solid. "Then I'd log it anyway, Captain. Because tight schedules don't override safety regulations. That's what you taught us." Mark felt something unlock in his chest. This moment, this exact moment, was why the scholarship existed. Not to train technically proficient pilots, to build pilots who understood that rules existed for reasons written in blood and tragedy. He pulled out his phone. "Log it, I'll call maintenance." Emma's fingers moved across her screen, typing the entry with the same care she'd shown on the walk-around. Mark called the hangar. 5 minutes later, the white van arrived. Mike stepped out, older now, grayer, but still carrying the same toolbox he'd carried a year ago. Mike examined the stain, wiped it with a rag, checked the fluid. "This is residual from work we did 2 days ago. Cleaned the area, but some seeped back from the fitting threads. System solid, we pressure tested after the repair. No active leak." He pulled out his tablet and made the notation. "But good catch. Rather have you guys paranoid than cavalier." Emma updated her log entry. "Verified by maintenance. Residual from prior repair. System pressure normal. Cleared for flight." Mike signed off and headed back to his van. Mark and Emma finished the walk-around. Everything else clean. They climbed into the cockpit and began the pre-flight checklists. Emma's hands were steady now, the nervousness burned away by focus. She moved through each item with precision, calling out the checks, verifying the responses. The overhead panel, the flight management system, the radios. She handled it all like she'd been doing it for years instead of months. At 7:55, they called for taxi clearance. Ground control gave them runway 19. Emma taxied the $70 million aircraft like it was an extension of her body. Smooth control inputs, perfect centerline tracking, exactly the right speed. At the hold short line, she ran the final checks. Everything showed green. The tower cleared them for takeoff. Emma advanced the throttles. The Rolls-Royce engine spooled up with that distinctive whine that still gave Mark goosebumps after 19 years of flying. The Gulfstream accelerated, the runway lights blurring past, 60 knots, 80, 120, rotation speed. Emma pulled back smoothly on the yoke. The nose lifted, the main gear left the pavement. New Jersey dropped away below them as they climbed into March morning sky. Mark monitored the instruments, but Emma didn't need help. She flew the departure procedure perfectly. Altitude exactly on target, heading precise, radio calls professional and clear. At 10,000 feet, she leveled off and Mark took the controls. "Talk to me about the hydraulic stain. What went through your mind?" Emma let out a breath. "Honestly, my first thought was, it's probably nothing, don't be that paranoid new pilot. But then I remembered what Instructor Rodriguez said in ground school. He told us about a captain who ignored a small oil stain because he was behind schedule. The engine seized on approach. They barely made the runway. I remember that accident. 2008. Nobody died, but it was close. Yeah, so I figured, better to look paranoid than crash. She paused. Plus, you taught us that if we see something, we say something. Every time. No exceptions. Mark felt pride and relief mixing in his chest. The scholarship could have failed in 1,000 ways. They could have produced technically proficient pilots who'd learned nothing about culture. But this moment, Emma seeing a potential issue and refusing to ignore it despite pressure, proved the program worked. They flew south in comfortable silence. The coastline appeared below, then open ocean. Emma handled the radios, monitored the systems, made position reports. At cruise altitude, Mark watched her work and thought about Victoria, about the 12 years between Patterson's harassment and the hydraulic leak, about all the moments where someone could have intervened, could have helped her become the pilot she should have been. They couldn't save Victoria, but they could build 100 Emmas, 1,000. Pilots who understood from day one that safety mattered more than ego, that experience didn't excuse poor judgment, that speaking up was strength, not weakness. 3 hours later, they began descent into Miami. Emma flew the approach by hand, smooth, controlled, exactly on glide path. The landing was so gentle, Mark barely felt the wheels touch. She taxied to the FBO and shut down the engines. After the passengers deplaned, Emma sat quietly for a moment. Then she turned to Mark. Can I tell you something? Always. A year ago, I was stocking shelves at Target, night shift, coming home at 3 a.m. to my son, standing in the parking lot some nights, watching planes fly over, thinking that was never going to be me. Her voice thickened. And today I just landed a Gulfstream in Miami. Because you decided people like me deserve a chance. Mark shook his head. Emma, you earned every bit of this. I just opened a door. You walked through it. You did the work. Still, she unbuckled. I promise you something. When I'm a captain someday, I'm going to train people exactly like you trained me. With patience, with standards, with respect. I'm going to pass this forward. That's all I can ask. They walked off the aircraft together. The Florida sun was bright and warm, a stark contrast to the New Jersey morning they'd left behind. Mark watched Emma cross the tarmac toward the crew van, already pulling out her phone to call her son, and felt the weight of responsibility shift slightly. The program was working, the culture was changing, one pilot at a time. 3 years after the hydraulic leak incident, Mark woke to his alarm at 5:15 on a December morning. The ritual unchanged. Same bed, same photograph of Sarah on the nightstand, same moment of touching the frame before getting up. But the hollow ache had softened over time, memory without the knife edge of fresh grief. Downstairs, Lily was already awake at the kitchen table. 15 now, taller, sharper, more like Sarah every day. Her ground school textbooks were spread across the surface. She'd started working toward her private pilot license 2 months ago. Mark made pancakes while she studied airspace classifications. When she looked up, he asked, "Test this week?" "Thursday, I'm ready." "Your mom would be proud. I know I am." Lily smiled. "Thanks, Dad." She hesitated. "Can I ask you something?" "Always." "Do you think about Captain Brennan? About what happened?" The question caught him off guard. "Sometimes? Why?" "I've been thinking about it for a project. About how the scholarship came from that whole situation, like something good came from something bad." She chewed her pencil. "Do you think she's okay?" Mark sat down across from her. "I don't know. I heard she's working as a safety consultant in Oregon. But Emma told me last week that she ran into one of Victoria's former first officers at a conference. He said Victoria still maintains she was wronged, still tells people I sabotaged her career." "That's sad." "Yeah, it is." Mark looked at his daughter. "But Lily, here's what I learned. You can understand why someone is the way they are without excusing what they do. Victoria was hurt badly by the system. That's real, but it doesn't justify her putting passengers at risk or lying about me. Both things are true." Lily nodded slowly. "That's what I'm writing about, how we fix the system so fewer people get hurt in the first place." "You're writing about the scholarship?" "For my civics project." about how changing systems is better than just punishing individuals. She grinned. I interviewed Emma. She said you saved her life. Mark's throat tightened. Mama saved her own life. She just needed someone to believe in her. That's what she said you'd say. He checked his watch. I've got a training flight, new graduate from the 3rd cohort. You good here? Aunt Sarah's picking me up for school. Fly safe, Dad. Always. That evening, alone in his office, Mark was organizing his desk when he found it. An old phone charger tangled with papers at the back of a drawer. Sarah's phone. He'd boxed up her belongings 5 years ago, couldn't bear to look at most of it. Now he stared at the charger for a full minute before plugging it in. The phone took forever to boot. When the screen finally lit up, the wallpaper showed Lily at 7 years old, gap-toothed and grinning. Mark's vision blurred. He scrolled through old photos, messages, calendar reminders from a life that no longer existed. Then he saw it. Voice memos folder. One recording. Title, For Mark, When You Need It. Recorded 1 week before Sarah died. His hands shook as he pressed play. Static. Then Sarah's voice, weak but unmistakably her. Mark, if you're listening to this, I'm gone and you're struggling. He stopped breathing. I know you. You're burying yourself in work, trying to be perfect for Lily, exhausted. So I need to tell you something, baby, and I need you to really hear it. Pause. Sound of Sarah adjusting position, coughing softly. You are the most principled person I've ever known. It's why I fell in love with you. You never compromise on what's right, even when it costs you, even when it's hard. Mark's vision blurred completely, tears running down his face. But someday, someone is going to try to make you bend, try to make you choose between easy and right. When that happens, and it will, I need you to choose right, like you always do. Her voice got stronger, because that's what you'll teach Lily, not by words, by example, by being the man who checks everything twice, the man who brings everyone home safely, the man who believes integrity matters more than approval. She coughed again, then laughed softly. I won't be there to see it, but I know you'll do it, because you're you. You'll do the right thing even when it terrifies you, even when it threatens everything you've built. Another pause. Tell Lily her mom loved her more than life itself, and Mark, Sarah's voice broke. Don't forget to live, please, for me. Build something that matters. Love people. Take chances. Don't let grief turn you into a ghost. The recording ended. Mark sat in the silence, phone clutched in both hands. Sarah had known. She'd recorded this knowing he'd face a moment exactly like Victoria. She'd prepared him, guided him, given him permission to move forward even when she couldn't be there to see it. He played it again and again. Each time the message became clearer. He'd done what she asked. He'd chosen right when it was hard. He'd built the scholarship. He'd trained 197 pilots with the values Sarah had loved in him. Integrity, humility, courage. He'd turned his grief into something that mattered. His phone buzzed. Text from Lily. Passed my practice test. 96%. Can Emma come to dinner tomorrow to celebrate? Mark wiped his eyes and typed back. Absolutely, I'll cook. Dad, we'll order pizza. It's safer for everyone. He laughed despite the tears. Deal. The next morning, Mark drove to Teterboro for another training flight. The alarm at 5:15, the routine unchanged. But as he walked across the tarmac toward the waiting Gulfstream, the December sun breaking over New Jersey, he felt Sarah's presence like she was walking beside him. The new pilot, Angela Torres, 28, former paramedic, single mother of 2, was waiting by the aircraft. She looked nervous, the same way Emma had looked 2 years ago, the same way Mark had looked 15 years ago on his first day with Richard. He shook her hand, felt a slight tremor of first flight anxiety. Ready? Angela nodded. Ready, Captain? They completed the walk-around together. No leaks this time, no defects, just a perfect aircraft waiting to be flown by someone who'd earned the chance. Mark climbed into the left seat. Angela took the right. They ran through checklists, called for clearance, began taxiing toward the runway. The tower cleared them for takeoff. Mark advanced the throttles. The engines roared. The aircraft accelerated down the runway faster and faster until Angela called out rotation speed and Mark pulled back on the yoke. The nose lifted, the wheels left the pavement. New Jersey fell away below them as they climbed into clear winter sky. At 10,000 feet, Mark handed the controls to Angela. "Your aircraft." She took them with steady hands. "My aircraft." Mark watched her fly, smooth, confident, exactly like they'd trained her. He thought about Victoria, about Emma, about the 197 pilots they'd trained so far, about Lily studying for her written exam downstairs this morning, about Sarah's voice on that recording, telling him to build something that mattered. He looked at Angela focused on her instruments, at the sky stretching endless ahead, at everything working exactly as it should when people did things right. This was how culture changed. Not overnight, not with one decision, but one person at a time. One flight at a time. One moment of choosing right over easy. One moment of speaking up when staying quiet would be simpler. One moment of integrity when compromise would be more comfortable. Mark's voice came out quiet, speaking to Sarah, to Angela, to himself. "We're doing it, building them right from the start, teaching them what you taught me. That safety matters more than schedule. That humility matters more than experience. That doing the right thing when it's hard, the only choice worth making." Angela glanced at him. "Sir?" Mark smiled. "Nothing, just thinking out loud. You're doing great. Keep flying." And she did. And Mark watched. And somewhere Sarah was watching too. And the circle continued. Ending where it began, beginning where it ended. Proof that the only legacy worth leaving was one built on people who understood that bringing everyone home safely mattered more than anything else. The sun rose higher, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Below, the world turned slowly, and in the cockpit of a Gulfstream at 41,000 feet, two pilots flew north toward whatever came next, carried forward by the principles of everyone who'd taught them that doing the right thing, especially when it was hard, was the only way worth flying. Part 3. Complete. Revised. Word count, 6,002 words. Full story complete, revised. Total word count, 18,853 words.